One mistake or one problem is when the writing is just too short. Hi there, I'm Joycean Akufo. I'm the Managing Director of Geek School Tutoring. So today I want to talk about the things that cause children to fail the writing task in the 11 plus exams, be it for grammar schools that have the creative writing element, or independent schools, or even common entrance. Basically, any sort of entry exam for secondary schools that require a writing task, the writing task being a short story, completing a story with an opener, finishing the story that's being given in a passage, writing a diary entry, writing a letter or an email that's often used these days, and so on. One mistake or one problem is when the writing is just too short.
So, before we carry on with this amazing video, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so that you will get notified every time a new Geek School video goes up. Enjoy!
So I have got an example of this which I will discuss in a live marking in this video, so just keep watching. You need to give the marker, the examiner, something to mark, and if you have been given 25 minutes, half an hour to write a piece, it can't just be one big block of a paragraph which is like, you know, a quarter of the page or something. It's just not long enough. So many children fall into this trap if they run out of ideas. Maybe they didn't really understand the passage that they've read. Basically, they just don't know what to write, or they write too slowly. Both of these areas mean that the child in question struggles with writing, and there are usually some really clear and obvious reasons for this. Number one being there just isn't enough reading going on. Secondly, I hear parents talking about their children loving to read, but then when you see their creative writing, it's not evidenced, and often that means they're reading not enough challenging books for their age. So a lot of children love the David Walliamses, the Jacqueline Wilsons, and so on. And that's fine. Those books are fine to read in leisure for fun, especially for a child in year 5 or year 6. You know, by those year groups you should have graduated from reading those books and start reading books that are a little bit more challenging, from authors that use more complicated vocab, you know, the kind where, you know, at least on one page of the book there'd be a word a word in there that you would need to use the dictionary for. If your child never uses the dictionary for the books that they're reading, it's either that the books are far too easy, which means they can read that in their leisure and have another book for you know, helping them expand their vocab and so on, or they're just not checking. So these are some red flags for parents to check if you have a child who's prepping for the 11 plus. Spelling. Oh my goodness, it's so painful when you see the writing of a child who's got really good structure, a really good story, has worked really hard with description, but the piece is littered with spelling mistakes. What happens? Well, they will get marked down. You know, so spelling is a big area of the marking for any of these exams, and for marking in general. You know, children often mix up homophones, and there is a video on this channel describing homophones, what they are, what to look out for, some of the commonly misspelt, there, and there, whose, to, and so on. They're usually mixed up by children who haven't got a good grasp of the differences between them. You know, when to use the pronoun for there, when to use the contraction for there, and so on. Grammar. So I've painstakingly put together a grammar dictionary for the 11 plus and for the SATs. If your child struggles to understand grammar and how to use it, that is a very, very good resource. I've put it together based on years of tuition and years of looking at some of the key problem areas that children face, and then a culmination of knowing that there isn't a comprehensive guide. You can get a book, let's say Bond English 9 to 10, and in the key it will have a list of the grammar rules and so on, but it won't have everything that's needed. So if you compare it with the 8 to 9 and the 10 to 11 books, you'll see that there are some that are missing. That's just one publisher as an example, but this is something that I've seen across the board, and so I've created a grammar dictionary which has everything your child needs to know for the 11 plus exams. Punctuation. Unfortunately, it kind of goes hand in hand with reading. You know, children who generally don't punctuate well, they're not reading books that they need to read at their level, and so they're not exposed to the type of punctuation use. It amazes me how some children of this age who clearly demonstrate a good grasp of the English language can write maybe 5 or 6 lines and there is no punctuation in it whatsoever. Until they get to the end, and then there's a full stop. Then another long piece of writing, another long block, and then nothing else. No speech marks where there's speech. Oh, it's quite interesting. Now, I usually get children to read their writing and not take a breath or a pause. I usually show them an example of that and show them literally, I cannot breathe when I'm reading your piece because there's no punctuation. There are no commas telling me that I should take a small pause, no semicolons, nothing. And it's one long paragraph worth of a sentence, so there are no full stops either. So literally, if I read this, I will pass out, I will faint. Give me some guidance on when to pause, when to breathe, please. That's usually what I tell the students, and it works. So punctuation can be improved by reading out. You know, you can hear when something doesn't sound right, and therefore, corrections. And the same thing for spellings, actually. Most children can hear when something sounds strange when they read back on their work, and so they can use that as a self-correction tool. Paragraphs. So I've mentioned this before, and there is a video on the Geek School free creative writing course, the link for which will be somewhere in the description for this video, and if not, just head over to geekschool.co.uk and you will find out some information about it. But basically, paragraph should be used when a new idea or a new turn of events starts. Many children, interestingly, don't have a good grasp of how to paragraph. They're often a bit confused about when to start. But literally, if, let's just say, in basic terms, somebody wakes up in the morning, Tom wakes up in the morning, bright and raring to go, he's excited, looks out the window, it's a sunny day, and he knows that he'll be allowed to play out. Paragraph 1. Paragraph 2, he's had his breakfast and got ready, had a shower and so on, and he's heading into the garden. paragraph 3, he gets there and discovers that his football has deflated. He can't quite work out why, and in his panic, to try and resolve it before his parents find out and tell him off for not putting it away in the shed, he decides to look for a way to pump the football. Next paragraph, he finds a pump, his dad's very expensive bike pump, which he's been told not to use, but in a flash of not thinking, he decides to try it, and then the nozzle snaps off. Next paragraph, he talks about, the panic of being caught and then deciding that he better own up. And he goes and shows his dad what's happened, and his dad laughs because it's not broken, it's just, some other part of the pump. You see, every different turn of events has a different paragraph. Incoherent. Now, when something is incoherent, it would have been compounded by no paragraphing, no or limited punctuation, ineffective grammar use, poor spelling, and generally lack of planning. I've seen children be given a writing task about going to the seaside, but then they end up on the moon and they're back at the seaside, but this time they're heading back home. We don't know how they got to the seaside because it hasn't been said, how they got to the moon, but somehow they're back at the seaside and going home. And the favourite, and it was all a dream. No, it wasn't. You just couldn't be bothered to finish the story with a decent conclusion. Oh, I'm not shouting really, but basically coherence is so important. If it doesn't make sense to the reader, it doesn't make sense, and it will be marked down. You can imagine having hundreds, maybe thousands of creative writing tasks to mark, and they're up against time and all of that. It's probably quite frustrating. I mean, my pile of writing is nowhere near what schools and grammar schools that have the creative writing element have to deal with, and I get frustrated sometimes. And finally, when the writing doesn't have enough depth, there isn't enough description, literally it's short sentences really. One morning Bob woke up. So at this point, my battery died on the camera, which is just fantastic, isn't it? But nothing would stop me from finishing this video and giving you all the tips and advice needed to help your child ace the creative writing or the writing task element of the 11 plus papers. So I was talking about description and the importance of giving as much description as possible. And one of the best ways to do this is to think about the senses. I always tell my students that as the writer, you have to get the reader feeling, seeing, smelling, tasting. If you're describing a birthday cake, how it smells, how it tastes. Is it a sponge cake with strawberry filling inside? What does that taste like? Is it revolting? Does it make your stomach churn? All of these bits of information need to be described in good and thorough detail so that the reader can taste anything that needs to be tasted, can smell it, when they touch it. If they were to close their eyes and try and imagine what they're reading in their mind's eye, it should be very tangible and easy for them to go into the experience of what they're reading. And those are the signs of excellent description, which is often missing in a lot of children's writing, especially those who never seem to write very much or run out of ideas about what to write. They're often not describing in detail, so this is something that can be worked on. And to get a good idea of how to write descriptively, reading is a must. reading as widely as possible, looking at fictional books and seeing how authors manage the description of their characters and whatever scenario is going on will go a very long way in helping to write descriptively. So that's it. I think I've covered most, if not everything, that's needed for acing the 11 plus creative writing task. I hope that's been useful, and please by all means add some comments so that I know if there's anything else that you'd like me to cover in these videos, and I'll do my best to help. Thank you so much for hanging in there for quite an unusual ending to a video, and see you in the next one. Bye. College,